Hey everyone, this is Braden and Ream from VoiceFlow, and today we're going to be talking about how to structure a voice product team or a conversational AI product team here for Voice Global. Super excited to be able to do this quick little chat today. Hopefully I'll be able to take some questions as I'm going to be online throughout this session, even though I am pre-recording this. But yeah, so let's dive right in. Oh, if I can get my slide, there it is. So welcome. So a little bit about me. So I'm the CEO of VoiceFlow. If you don't know VoiceFlow already, so we help people design, prototype, and build voice apps for Amazon Alexa and Google Assistant. You can think of us like a creative platform for building apps on these different assistants. We help around 30,000 different designers, developers, and teams be able to work together and streamline their whole process. And I'd hope that's what gives us some authority to do a quick talk today on just some of the findings that we've seen now over the past 2 years. We've now powered over, a little over 200 million conversations, and depends how you count, utterances and things. But we've seen a lot of great things built on VoiceFlow. We've seen a lot of things that didn't go so well, and so just wanted to share some learnings on sort of this space in general. So in this talk, we're going to cover CX product teams, also known as voice product teams. I'm going to use the terminology of just conversational experience product teams or conversation design product teams, but loosely just CX product teams is probably easier. We're going to be talking about the different roles on these teams, the challenges they face, and sort of the future of how these teams will be structured. Let's get started. So the first topic I want to talk about is the centralization of these CX product teams. And to really understand this, we have to go a little bit through some of the macro trends that are popping up that's actually forcing this to happen. So generally speaking, product shifts occur, or platform shifts, I should say, occur roughly every 15 years. So a platform shift is a major shift in computing. It's a shift in the way that we actually interact with technology on a daily basis. Roughly every 15 years, we'll see a new platform emerge, whether it's personal computing, mobile, or I now believe we're in AI assistants, and not particularly just voice, but as we'll see in the next slide, this encompasses both chat and voice. And so with every platform shift, generally there's an interface shift that happens either before or a little bit after, and this is going to be the interface shift that unlocks new possibilities. So if you remember when the personal computer first came out, we actually had command line was the first interface, and then we had the graphical user interface, the GUI, that launched, and that unlocked a ton of new use cases and opportunities for companies to build apps for these platforms. Same thing happened with the smartphone. When that first launched, so I'm Canadian, so I have a bit of a soft spot here, but the Blackberries were all the rage. They had the keyboards. And that was the first popular smartphone, and of course we then had an interface shift where that then switched to touchscreens, and that just unlocked a ton of new use cases and opportunities because of the interface shift. So it wasn't actually the platform shift there, it was the interface shift that unlocked a lot of opportunities. And I now believe, our team I should say now believes that we're in a platform shift for moving from mobile to AI assistants. These are sort of proactive, omni-channel assistants that are able to help us in our everyday lives. And these don't just have to be over voice, they can also be over chat, but I do think we're seeing an interface shift right now where chat was the first interface to launch with that new platform. That was the messenger bots that came out in 2014, 2015, it was sort of a big craze. And now we're starting to see a shift to voice assistants. And when this shift happens, I should say, we're not replacing previous platforms, we're not replacing previous interfaces, it's always just augmenting and adding additional new use cases. Of course, I still use my PC, I'm using it right now to do this talk, but then I also have a phone, and then of course I'm going to have my voice assistant. It's about adding new use cases and augmenting our experience over time, and every platform is going to find its particular niche that works really best for it. And so each shift, each interface shift generally requires a new process of a new creative suite of software. It requires new tooling, new processes in place. And so, we've seen that with personal computing, we've seen that with mobile, and we now believe that's also going to happen with AI assistants as well. And so this is really interesting, especially when we think about our space. Generally, we're in sort of the Alexa Google bubble, and now you have some of the independent assistants as well. So you've got the SoundHounds, you've got Sarents, and a couple of these other ones that are popping up. But generally, we always think of just Alexa and Google, when really conversational AI, it spans so many different channels. And you can imagine for the modern enterprise, managing all these different channels is becoming a bit of a pain. Unlike mobile, that was a bit more of a consolidated platform shift, and there were a bunch of different platforms at the start. So you can remember Palm Pilot, you had BlackBerry, of course, you had Microsoft with their own app store. There were different platforms, but it wasn't nearly as divergent as what we're seeing right now in terms of the number of different conversational AI platforms that enterprises and brands have to be thinking about. And so what's happening is you're seeing these organizations break up the channels by their business line. And so you'll have sales with a sales chatbot. You're going to have HR with an HR chatbot. You might have customer success, and they're going to have a voice IVR. Then you're going to have maybe marketing, and they're going to have an Alexa skill. It's just all very siloed right now, as everything's broken up by business line. And what often happens when we speak with some of these teams is, let's say all 4 teams are working on different projects. They're all using different tooling, so they can't collaborate effectively. They can't, share designs, share assets, things like that. They're all using different NLPs often because they're working on different channels. And then ultimately, when they have to go to stakeholders like legal and marketing to get everything approved, legal and marketing is approving the same thing 4 times. It's the same for welcome flows. It's the same for help flows, because these are all being built in a silo. And so this is a bit of an inefficient process, but this is very similar to what we've seen in previous platform shifts as well. This is just sort of the natural first step. But of course, identical to what we saw in mobile, we're now starting to see these in-house conversational product teams emerge where it's consolidating all of the different business line products into one team. So for example, you can imagine with mobile, it doesn't make sense for sales to have their own mobile app. And for them to be building it themselves and deploying resources. It doesn't make sense for marketing to have its own mobile app. It should just be one central mobile app, its core business, and then that of course will solve particular functions, be it sales or marketing, but that's going to be managed by a central team. And so I've just highlighted a couple here, but we are starting to see sort of these in-house conversational product teams. That's the whole purpose of this talk. And it's a really exciting time to be in conversational AI, as more resources and more investment is going to be poured into the space as these teams emerge to build better and better experiences. And so what these centralized conversational product teams are doing is they're responsible for the creation of all these different channels. So Facebook Messenger, Siri once it launches, Alexa, Google, just managing all the different assets and then working on these projects one at a time or multiple projects at once. But just having sort of a central authority for all these different channels is really, really valuable. So now we're going to dive into the workflow of these CXP teams. If you had any questions, again, I'm online right now, even though I'm pre-recording this, so feel free to ask questions. I can sort of dive into them in the chat. And so this is the typical product workflow. This is not specific to any particular platform or channel, but generally, if you're building a mobile app or a website, you're going to be designing, prototyping, also known as user testing. Then you're going to build it, and then you're going to manage and analyze. That's your excuse me. That's your CMS. That's your analytics. That's sort of the post-build part of the workflow. Now, what we're seeing is the emergence of sort of these full stack solutions, which is where you use one platform for the entire workflow. So you're using them for design, prototype, build, manage, analyze, et cetera, et cetera. And I have some thoughts about this. I think there's a rationale for why this works right now, but I don't know if that's going to be the long-term case. And so I quickly drafted up a graphic here, and I want to explain it. So you can see on the top, this is the emerging market ROI. That's sort of the name of this chart, and it's broken into 4 different quadrants. On our y-axis, on the left, you have the amount of investment a company has to put into building a team, and not just outsourcing it to an agency or just sort of throwing it to a couple interns and building out a quick project. That's sort of the left side. On the bottom, you have the potential of the solution. So, could this potentially drive billions of dollars in new revenue? Is this going to be core business, or is this just sort of an experiment right now? And so I think where a lot of emerging channels are currently, I think VR is still here, I think voice is still here, is we're sort of an innovation experiment. Even if you had the absolute best Alexa skill in the world to order pizza, it's not yet going to drive billions and billions of dollars and merit building a 2,000 person internal team. I think that's different for some of the independent assistants. So if you're, Mercedes or one of the larger car companies building an assistant for the car, I think that has high potential already. But I think in terms of just sort of the app ecosystems, the third-party apps, and this is where most of the companies are going to be playing. They're not going to be building their own voice assistants yet. If they are, then they're already in the high potential category. But for most brands that are sort of in the low potential category, it's dependent on the monetization, the discoverability of third-party apps. They're going to be in this innovation experiment phase. And so the ideal is that over time, as the market continues to grow, the potential continues to increase for sort of the top line abilities of your particular voice app. You're going to start to invest more and more over time, and eventually you land in that top right quadrant, which is high investment, high potential though, and so it's core business for you. Where businesses don't want to end up is they don't want to overinvest and it becomes a failed bet. So low potential, high investment, but they also don't want to have low potential, even though the market's already at a high potential state. It means they've actually, they've just fallen behind. They have not been investing as much as they should, and because of that, they're in the catching up phase. So you do not want to be in that top left. And then, of course, you could also be in the bottom right, which is you put out a quick experiment and the app completely blows up. It's it's wildly successful. I call that a short-lived unicorn because the second that you have a wildly successful app with low investment, it's going to be incredibly competitive, incredibly quick. Everyone's going to launch copycats and start to saturate that market, and it's going to push you up into the top right, which is going to be your core business. And so getting back to full stack solutions, why I think these are interesting right now is because teams are not willing, and nor should they be, to invest in the design, prototype, sort of building out world-class tooling for designing, prototyping, building, manage, and analyze, and having specific tools until they've figured out sort of what the high potential use case is. And so because of that, a lot of teams are just using sort of these full stack solutions, very much like a Wix. It's going to do the entire thing for you. And I think that's going to be what we're going to see in the SMB market. So in, let's say, 5 years, there's a lot more different parts of the voice market, which are sort of at maturity. They're high potential. You're going to see sort of the Wix of voices, those pop up, where it's going to be offering SMBs a full stack solution that's low cost, but able to tap into some of that potential. But in terms of enterprises, when it comes to investment, they're likely going to want to invest in having the best design tool, the best prototyping tool, the best tools for building, and the best to manage, analyze, and sort of all the post-build workflows. You're going to want to have the best because it's going to be highly competitive in that category, and you can't afford to have, sort of be a master of all, a jack of trades, a master of none. You definitely want to invest in the best in each. And that's what we see in the enterprise side today. For websites, if it's core business to you, you typically have a separate design tool, a separate prototyping tool, etc. And the same thing for your mobile app. So I thought this is just an interesting concept when we talk about one tool to rule them all. I think that works right now, but I don't think it's going to work long term for enterprises. I think it's going to break up into separate tools, but there's certainly some merit for it right now. I just don't know how long that window is going to be open. So getting into what the typical workflow looks like today. And so it's a very solitary sort of manual process. Generally, there's 4 steps to this, but then there's also sort of a lot of going back and forth. So first step being, you're going to have your requirements gathered by product managers. So these are people finding out what's the persona of our app, what's the problem we're solving, just sort of very high level UX research. And then from there, That's going to be passed on to copywriters as well as the actual conversation designers. Typically, conversation designers come from a VUI background, they come from a UX background, typically not a visuals background, which is what a lot of people get confused with. They infer design is, if I was a designer at one company, why can't I be a conversation designer? Visual design and conversation design is fairly different. UX design and conversation design are sort of the closest comparables. And so from there, we're going to have sample dialogues written. So this is just generating example text of what the assistant might say. And then we're going to go and user test that, usually with WOZ testing or Wizard of Oz testing, where this is literally where we are going to mock up and sort of act as though we are the assistant. And then from there, we're going to just get user feedback, very qualitative. And then we're going to pass this on to the conversation designer, who's then going to add the flow logic. The reason flowcharts are really important when they're being paired with sample dialogues is sample dialogues are linear, but flow logic, like flowcharts, allow you to create multi-turn dialogues that are a little bit more contextual. So as an example, if you're ordering a pizza, you could have all these different sort of responses. If the user says this, then respond to them with this, et cetera, et cetera. But it's how you link them all together. That's the context, and that requires sort of lines on a flow chart. If I was to say, hey, do you want to order a pizza? And the user says yes, I want a pepperoni. And I go, do you want to pay by credit card? And then they say yes. We need to have a contextual link between our yes and I want to order a pepperoni pizza. To us, like humans, this is very intuitive. We're like, well, of course, you just said this, and now you're going to say this. They're answering the question, but that's context. That's contextually linking, and that requires a flowcharting approach, or it requires some really sophisticated spreadsheets. But for most designers, it's just much easier to do so in a flow-based manner. So that's why flowcharts are really important, is just having that context built in. And so at the end of the process here, we're going to have our flowcharts, we're going to have our Word docs, or whatever sort of place we want to write our sample dialogues in. Sometimes it's Excel. And then from there, we're going to pass that over to the developers to do a prototype. Then we're going to go back to our user testing phase, go to user testing, change our sample dialogues, change our flowcharts. And that's where we're going to get a lot of iteration. At some point, depending on the org, we're going to bring in legal and marketing. They're just going to take a look at our sample dialogues mainly. They don't really need context for the flowchart. They just need the sample dialogues, and they're just checking to make sure that everything's on brand, that it's, we're not violating any legal terms. And so that's going to have to get the clear. And then at some point, we're also going to have to engage our broader stakeholders, which is, potential clients, doing sort of full user testing with a live prototype that's, near production, as well as executives. And so this is where the broader sort of stakeholder process comes into play. So you've got your conversation designers and copywriters. They're typically using Word docs, Excel sheets. Visio is a really common sort of tool set, just using the Office tools. They're iterating on sort of the core designs. Those are often the design tools. From there, that gets passed off to your second layer of stakeholders. That's your developers, your product managers, whoever else is sort of looking over it from a high level, making sure it meets business objectives. And then lastly, you're going to have a different sort of set of documents that are more for presentations. So this is where you might show off your flowchart in a PDF. You're going to show off your live prototype, maybe use Adobe XD or VoiceFlow. And that's going to be for your marketing team, executives, clients, and legal. So lots of different parts of the process. The workflow is fairly complex right now. And this is only going to get increasingly complex as we're starting to move more and more from single-turn dialogues being viewed as just one-way interactions, no design work needed, to every single-turn dialogue is interconnected with each other as a multi-turn dialogue, and that requires more design, that requires more context. So we're going to see the proliferation of these conversational product teams grow as the demands of the design teams and the demands of the actual designs that need to be put into place continue to grow. So in terms of final thoughts, we went over a ton of sort of different angles, discussing how enterprises and brands are structuring their teams to sort of tackle conversational AI. The first is we are now starting to see the shift from business lines, creating their own conversational products that are, off persona. They're completely made in a silo versus, the silo next to them. We're now starting to see the consolidation of these teams, which is really great, and I expect that's only going to continue to increase. The second is the workflow has become a lot more sophisticated for some of the larger enterprises, where they already are seeing significant value being created, and because of that, they're investing a lot of resources into creating these centralized teams with centralized processes. We went over a little bit of the workflow, which generally consists of designing with Word docs and Excel, as well as a Visio or some other flowcharting tool, passing that off to developers for prototyping, and then stakeholder management. It's sort of a broader theme as you iterate through until the final product. And then we also talked a little bit about sort of the life cycle of the tooling, and how right now we're going to see a lot of tools that are trying to be a one-size-fits-all. And those are going to work for SMBs long term who don't have the resources to invest in best-in-class tools per category. But for the short term, those tools are going to be great in terms of just having a low investment, getting a voice app out there without investing too much. But over time, we are going to see enterprises and brands, as the potential of the market continues to increase, they are going to proportionally increase their team size. Otherwise, they're going to be left behind, or they're going to overinvest too early. So great. I'm going to be in the comments or in the chat. Hopefully this was insightful. If you'd like to chat about anything, if you have any particular questions, you can feel free to shoot me an email. And hope you're all having an amazing night or morning, depending on whenever you stream this, and we'll chat later. Thanks.